Welcome back. In this lecture, we will loop over the array using the forEach method. We already learned about how to loop over an array using the for of loop, but here the forEach method is really fundamentally different. Here, let's now start the work with our bank account data, but that is in a very simplified way. And so let me get this data here into the present lecture. Paste here. Now here, let's say that we wanted to loop over this movements array. So in order to print the message for each movement in this bank account. So here you see that the array, here these positive values are basically deposits and these negative values are withdrawals. So we can print something to the console saying whether the user deposited or withdraw some money. So let's actually start by doing this using a for of loop. Write for const. Now let's create a variable that is movement of movements, and then we'll log something to the console. So according to the movement, write if movement. So basically, if the current movement is greater than 0, then log this to the console. Console.log you deposited movement. Else console.log you withdrawn the dot absolute value, that is ABS, and then give the movement. And so now here this solution works perfectly. Now let's see that movement spelling here. Movement. Now let's see, we have that all positive values here are deposited and the negative values here are withdrawn. And but now let's finally learn how to use the for each method to achieve the exact same thing, but in my opinion in an easier way. So to loop over the moments array, let's write we use for each moments dot for each. E should be capital here, don't forget that. And then the for each actually requires a callback function. So write function. So forEach is here technically a higher order function. And so as we learned in the last section, which require a callback function in order to tell it what to do. So it's the forEach method here. So that will call this function callback. So we are not calling it ourselves as always. That's of course important to keep in mind. But when exactly will forEach actually call this callback function? So, well, what the for each method does is loop over the array and in each iteration it will execute. This callback function here also, as the for each method calls this callback function in each iteration, it will pass in the current element. And the current element of the array as an argument, and we can specify that here. So that is movement. And so again each time this callback here is called in each iteration. So it will receive the current element of the array. So current element of the array as an argument, and here we can of course give the movement. So that is now we can exactly do the same thing here what we have written. This callback function, that is, let's write copy and then paste here. Now let's see the result. We have that all these values. Now let me separate these two for our reference. Console.log for each. These are all the for each ones. So this is how the for each method works. And so basically behind the scenes in iteration 0, it will call this function here. So an anonymous function in this case without a name, that is 0 iteration function. So it is going to call the value of 200. And in iteration 1, it will call the value, next one 450. Same like in iteration 2, function is 400. So same like this until it reaches the end of the array. And also this part of for each function passing in the current element of the array here like this, and this one is especially important to understand. So this basically is exactly the concept that I explained in the last section. So when I said that we use callback function to tell another higher order function exactly what we should do, and so in this case we tell for each that in each iteration. So it should log one of these two strings here to the console. So we give the for each method instructions by giving it a callback function. So which contains these instructions. So this is quite a hard concept to wrap you. But if you just continue using this from now on, then eventually it will start to make sense. Believe that. Now anyway, which of the two versions do you think is cleaner and easier to write and easier to read? So but using the for each method here and especially understanding the logic behind it with the callback function is still really important for all the other methods. Now let's move on to the some more for each methods. So that is what if we actually need the to counter variable, just like we can access the counter index of the array here of the for of loop. So remember how we did the for of. Let's just rewrite this. Let's write that for const of movement dot entries. So entries is in fact just another array method and it returns an array of arrays. So let's write here I, then the next one movement. So the counter variable in the for of loop, and then here in our string we could use that to say, for example, movement, that is right here, movement I plus 1. So we got an error that unexpected token here, right? Now let's see the result. See here we have that moment 1 you deposited 200, so only for deposits. And now let's write for withdrawal also. Let's see here. Now see here we got that 8 iterations, that is moment 1 you deposited 200 like that. So now it is looking good with the number of moments here. Now let's do the same for the for each method, and it is easier to get access to the current index. And so to understand how it works, we need to remember once more that it is the for each method who calls this callback function in each iteration, and it calls this function, it also passes in the current element of the array. But it actually does not pass it all. In fact, for each passes in the current element the index and the entire array that we are looping, and so therefore we can specify them here in our parameter. Just write there index array. So now of course we can just use one like we have been doing, or we can just use two, or we can use all three together. As always the names here do not enter, but what does matter is the order. So the first parameter always needs to be the current element, and the second parameter always is the index, and the third one is the entire array that we are looping over, because that's the order in which the arguments, so the actual values are passed into our callback function. So now let's just copy this here. We can do the same here. Now let's see the result. We got an error that I is not defined. That is here Here we have that I, but here we have written the index, we need I, and then here array, we need the shorter forms. Here the movement also move. Now let's replace these three here with the move. This one, and this one, and also this one. Now see the result. We have that same, but now you can see that it is a lot easier to get the current index in here for each. Just notice that the order of the parameters is different in both these scenarios. And in for each, the first value here is the current element, and the second one is the index, and the third one is the entire in the for of loop. And then the first element here, and when we see here in these entries of for of loop, so then the first element is the index, and the second value is the current array of the element. So don't forget here in this case. So the first element is the current element and then the index. Now this is how we loop over arrays with the for each method. So you should use for each and when you should use the for of loop. Well, one fundamental difference between these two of them is that you cannot break out of for each loop. So the continue and break statements do not work in the for each loop at all. So instead, for each will always loop over the entire array, and there is nothing that you can do about it. If you really need to break out of a loop, then you have to keep using the for of loop. But other than that, it really comes down to use your personal reference, just like so many other things in JavaScript. So every programming language always has many different ways or different tools to achieve the same thing. And especially as more things keep getting added to the language, there will always be more options to achieve the same result. So, in my opinion, this is a really brilliant and powerful mechanism, but I know that it's also rather complex to wrap your head around this. So, it actually took quite some time for you to full understand this myself back in the day. So, please don't become frustrated with this. It will all become obvious with the practice. So just keep using this and then you will be fine once you understand exactly how this works. So especially this mechanism of the callback and of the passing arguments into this callback here. So once you understand this fundamental mechanism, then working with all other array methods in this section will become really easy. So most of them follow the exact same principle of the callback function that we just explored here. So this is about the for each method. We will continue in the next lecture. Thank you.